My name is Charles Faddis. I spent 20 years in the Central Intelligence Agency working terrorism, weapons of mass destruction, and rogue states. I've been face to face with the world's most dangerous people and ideologies, and I've come to one conclusion: that our approach to these problems lacks common sense. That's what this show is about. It's about common sense solutions to the world's most significant problems. Welcome to the United States of Common Sense.
Welcome to the United States of Common Sense. With us today, we have Dr. Kerry Kriger, who is the founder and executive director of Save the Frogs, who's going to talk to us about some pretty alarming stuff like mass extinction. Dr. Kriger, welcome.
Hi, thanks a lot for having me.
Look, I got to admit that this is something that I stumbled on myself, and I read very, very widely all the time, but I stumbled on this relatively recently, this whole idea that we have a mass extinction ongoing of amphibians, not just frogs, but amphibians in general. What is going on, and what is the scale of this thing?
The frogs and toads and salamanders and newts are amphibians, and there's another amphibian most people have never heard of called caecilians, which are limbless amphibians. So together, the amphibians are the most threatened of all the vertebrate species on the planet, and about 1/3 of the world's amphibian species are in danger of extinction, meaning that if we don't do anything to remove or make better the current threats to the world's amphibians, we can expect about 1/3 of the world's species to go completely extinct in the near future. So it's about a couple thousand species are in danger of extinction. And it's a worldwide problem that's been an issue for at least 30 years, with frogs rapidly disappearing. And it's from a variety of problems that are induced by humans, because we have a very large human population, at least 7 billion people, and we have a huge impact on the planet. And the main threats to frogs are habitat destruction, pollution and pesticides, global warming and climate change, infectious diseases that are being spread by humans, over-harvesting for the pet and food trades, meaning taking frogs out of the wild to eat them or use them as pets, and also a variety of invasive species that predate on frogs and compete with them for habitat and spread diseases. So those are the main problems for frogs, and I can go into any detail about any of those threats if you like me to, but essentially what's happening is that there's a lot of people on the planet. We have a huge impact on ecosystems and wildlife, and frogs and amphibians in general have gotten to the point where many of those species cannot withstand the threats that that they're being faced with their habitat being destroyed, or us eating them, or dumping toxic chemicals in their swamps, or draining their swamps, running them over on the roads, etc.
So let me just ask you like a follow-up question here, because unfortunately, I think this danger of extinction thing, people get a little jaded on this. In other words, they start tuning this out. They hear this and they're like, yeah, don't talk to me about this. This is another spotted owl story. And I mean, actually, when you say danger of extinction, I mean, we're already talking about entire species that are effectively vanishing from places.
There's already been probably about 200 species gone extinct, and we can tell from the fossil record how often amphibians naturally go extinct. And to the best of our knowledge, they go extinct about one species every 500 years. And right now, they're going to extinct at a rate of several thousand times faster than they naturally do. As in 200 species in 30 years instead of one species every 500 years. And so there's the species that have already gone extinct. And then because there are a couple thousand amphibian biologists in the world who've been tracking many of these species' population sizes for a number of years, we're able to tell how, if they're on the decline, how rapidly they're declining. And it's about 40% of the world's species are declining in numbers, even if they're not yet endangered. So about a third of them are actually currently in danger of extinction, but at least 40% of the species are actually declining in numbers. That means every year, for 40%, thousands of amphibian species, their population has become smaller. And if that continues for enough years, then all of a sudden, most of the populations are gone.
So there are other species we've been hearing about recently. I mean, honeybees are a big issue. Everybody's heard about this. I know, at least in the eastern United States, bats. You know, you hear a lot about massive declines in the population. Is there a relationship here? Are there similar factors at work?
Yeah, a lot of these populations, even if you only look at amphibians, it could vary in different places. Maybe amphibians in a certain species. I was recently in Colombia, and they've got lots of poison dart frogs. They're brightly colored. People like to use them as pets. So one of their main threats is people taking them out of the wild to use them as pets. There's lots of places in the world where that's just not an issue, but perhaps there's lots of habitat destruction. So it always changes, but there are some commonalities. The bats that are having lots of trouble in America, that's from white nose syndrome, which is caused by a fungus. So it's a fungal disease, and it's spreading in part from human activity, because we travel from, say, one cave to another and maybe take that disease. We don't know we're doing it, but it's microorganisms. And one of the greatest threats to amphibians, and probably the most significant threat to amphibians that live in mountainous areas around the world, is from a fungus as well, called the chytrid fungus, Batrachochytrium dendrobatitis. And that fungus is spreading because we ship about 100 million amphibians around the world each year for use as pets, food, bait, laboratory animals, and in zoos, with virtually no disease regulations, no legislation to prevent it, no quarantines. Right now, this fungus, the chytrid fungus, it's 100% legal to import it into the United States. It's legal to import infected frogs into the United States. Frogs in general that are entering the United States are not being checked. And there's millions of frogs. I'm in California. We've got 3 million non-native American bullfrogs every year being imported into the state. And that's mostly for use as frog legs. They're coming from frog farms around the world. They have very high rates of infectious diseases, but it's legal to import them, and not many people are doing anything to stop that from happening. So we're spreading diseases around, and that's what's happening with the bats as well. Obviously not for people eating the bats, but humans move around the planet. When we move around the planet and when we ship animals around the planet, we ship diseases. With the bees, I think that it's still not 100% known why colony collapse disorder is happening, but I know that the European Union has recently banned, or at least temporarily banned, a couple different pesticides that they think are involved. And pesticides also have a huge effect on amphibians, because amphibians have permeable skin, and they're spending a lot of their time in the water where gravity is going to bring all the pesticides eventually. So they're absorbing lots of pesticides. In America, we have 18,000 plus registered pesticides. And most of those get approved without very thorough testing on their effects on amphibians. And the pesticide industry has a huge lobby and a lot of money. And our regulations in America are set up such that once a pesticide is approved, it's very difficult to get it off the market. So right now we've got lots of pesticides, many of which have perhaps hundreds of scientific studies detailing their negative impacts on wildlife and humans, and yet they're still legal. So we have a campaign to get atrazine banned. Atrazine has been banned in the European Union since 2004. It's made by Syngenta, the world's largest pesticide company, who's based in Switzerland, where it's actually illegal. But we're using 80 million pounds a year of it in America. It's one of our most commonly used herbicides. It's the number one herbicide used on corn, which is our number one crop in America. So we're using a lot of it. It's the number one pesticide detected in American tap water, rainwater, and groundwater. and it's got an abundant amount of scientific literature detailing its problems on amphibians and other wildlife. For amphibians, it causes immunosuppression, hermaphroditism, and even complete sex reversal at 2.5 parts per billion, which is below the legal limit. And it's even below what we're able to detect on our food. So it can be on our food at levels higher than that, and we don't even know because our technology is not good enough to detect it. And yet we're using 80 million pounds of it a year on a food crop that almost every American eats. And that, so on top of these things being they're wildlife issues, they're also human issues. So there's lots of overlap between the environment and human issues.
That's what I wanted to ask you. I mean, look, I think that most viewers would probably agree that, there's an intrinsic issue here simply in the loss of other life forms and the damage to the environment, the damage to the ecology. But let's switch it into the real what's in it for us kind of mode. In some of the literature, you hear this reference to mass extinctions like this as being sort of a canary in a coal mine kind of effect, meaning maybe we ought to be thinking about what these extinctions signal in terms of the environment for us directly. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Amphibians are known as bioindicators, which means that they are an early warning system of environmental decay. If something's wrong in the environment, they're one of the first groups of animals that will be affected by it. And based on our watching what's happening with them, we can, use that as a gauge. And they're bioindicators because they have permeable skin. They're able to absorb pollutants and pesticides. They're spending part of their time in the water, part of their time on the land. That's what amphibian means. So they're susceptible to problems in either of the ecosystems. And also they're slow to move. They can't fly off to another forest like a bird could do if the forest got chopped down. So if something happens, then they're susceptible to it. So right now, a third of the world's amphibian species are on the verge of extinction. They're going extinct thousands of times faster than they naturally do. So to me, that's a pretty clear statement about the state of our environment. And for me, I travel a lot, and I think anyone who travels a lot, whether it's in your car or going to flying somewhere, looking down, all you have to do is look down at what our land looks like. Most of it is houses, shopping malls, developments, agricultural land. It's not what it naturally was, which was forests and wetlands and savannas in certain places. It's virtually all being converted into human use. And most of those human uses are not very wildlife friendly. There's always going to be some wildlife species that do just fine around humans, but it's a decreased amount of biodiversity. So it's very clear, either just open your eyes and look around or look what's happening to wildlife in the world. Wildlife of all, not just amphibians, there's all kinds of extinctions taking place, and the human population keeps increasing. So unless humans in general start doing a much better job at protecting our wildlife and our landscapes, then there's no reason to think that much is going to change. Luckily, there is much more environmental awareness these days, and we're working on creating more. So, if everybody gets their act together, we can save a lot of the wildlife that otherwise, if we don't do anything, will probably go extinct.
What are the specific things that you're working on with your organization? What do you focus on in this regard?
Our number one focus always is environmental education, because I think that education is the root of everything. If we need a better environmental law, that law is never going to get put into place if the politicians are not educated and if nobody's asking them to create laws. If we think that our corporations are damaging land by building big pipelines and dumping bad chemicals and destroying land and getting developers who are allowed to develop on top of wetlands and critical habitats, if we think that those corporations are going to change their ways, if they're not educated and if society is not pressuring them into doing that, it's not going to happen. So environmental education is the key to making all environmental successes, on top of the fact that every person has an environmental impact and ecological footprint. So by educating people, you can improve your own ecological footprint and multiply that by the 7 billion people on the earth. It's a big impact. So we do a lot of education. We give a lot of educational presentations. I've spoken to over 200 schools and community groups, nonprofits, government agencies, live presentations. We make a lot of free educational materials for our website, savethefrogs.com, which has a few hundred pages of information on it. And also we run Save the Frogs Day, which we just had our 5th annual Save the Frogs Day, and we had events. We had about 200 events in 30 countries and directly reached about 14,000 people at live events. So it's a lot of education. And then we also have specific campaigns. We're working on getting atrazine, the bad pesticide, banned. So we, petition the Environmental Protection Agency. We've had rallies. We've had protests at restaurants that serve frog legs that refuse to stop serving frog legs. We've gotten 76 supermarkets and 2 restaurants to stop serving frog legs. We've gotten about 20 different schools to give up their animal dissection programs. And so, yeah, we have various campaigns like that. We've got some campaigns where there is habitat under threat, such as in San Francisco. The city of San Francisco is draining the Sharp Park wetlands to provide dry land to play golf on, but they're draining the wetlands that are home to endangered California red-legged frogs and San Francisco garter snakes illegally. And in Canada, there's a developer that's received authorization from the government, even though we sent in about 1,500 letters to the government detailing why it was environmentally destructive and therefore should be illegal, where they're going to be, if allowed to go through, building on top of endangered Fowler's toad habitat. In Ghana, we have a campaign to turn the Atiwa Forest into a national park. Currently, it's under threat from logging and mining, and it's the most biodiverse area in Ghana, which is in West Africa. So, yeah, we do various campaigns like that. But at the root of all of them is educating people, making sure that people know, just to begin with, that frogs are disappearing. And then aside from that, frogs are important. Frogs are worth saving. Here's how people can save them.
So the average guy sitting out there and this is the first he's ever heard of this, and all of a sudden he's thinking, wow, you know what, this is actually, I think, maybe kind of a big deal that species are vanishing at thousands of times the rate they should normally. What should they be doing? I mean, where should the effort go if you're going to try to turn this around?
Yeah, well, first off, anyone, certainly if they're interested in frogs and frog conservation, our website, savethefrogs.com, as I said, has hundreds of pages all about frogs, all about our activities and ways people can get involved. And some of the important things, just from a personal standpoint of helping frog populations, if you drive a car, then slow down driving on wet nights. Certainly if you see frogs jumping around certain times of year, there's lots of frogs get killed on the road. So sometimes it's just a matter of slow down when you're near a wetland area. People should not be using pesticides on their home property, spraying for weeds. Ask yourself, is it really that important to get rid of this plant that I'm going to spray some harmful chemicals right outside my house? And also, buying organic food reduces all of those pesticides that are being sprayed on crops all around the world. Not eating frog legs is really important. America actually imports 20% of the world's frog legs, and frog leg consumption is on the rise. Some people do it just from, culturally, it's in their culture. Some people they're at a bar and they see it and they think it's funny, so they order it. Lots of reasons, but whatever it comes down to, a lot of Americans are eating frog legs, and it's totally unnecessary. We have many other more ecologically friendly food sources. The pet trade is a big issue. A lot of people have frogs as pets, and a lot of these frogs are taken out of the wild, unbeknownst to the consumer and possibly even the vendor. And even of the frogs that are captive raised, as I said before, there's virtually no disease regulation. So when people are shipping these frogs around, they can be shipping diseases. Then all of a sudden your frog escapes, or you set it free because you don't know any better, and there goes its disease into your local frogs population. So not having frogs as pets is the simplest way to help in that respect. And then there's some basic things. Well, actually specific to frogs, people can build a frog pond. We destroy a lot of habitat, so we can just as soon build habitat for frogs. And it's a good educational lesson, certainly for schools, to build a frog pond. And we have a page on our site, savethefrogs.com/ponds, that's got info on that. And then there's a lot of stuff that's just basic. It helps not only frogs, but definitely the environment in general. Things like reducing your water consumption, turn off the tap. A lot of people don't really think about where their water's coming from. A lot of it's coming from some stream or some river, like the Colorado River, which doesn't even make it to the sea anymore because we take all the water out of it. If there's no water in the tributaries, then there's not going to be any frogs reproducing there. Not purchasing bottled water. We Americans go through 5 times as much bottled water as we did 20 years ago. The bottled water process is a really harmful process because it uses a lot of water at the factory. The plastic's made from petroleum, and then it's getting shipped to you, creating problems for the climate because you're using up fuel. So it's just a simple thing that most people don't even think about. Using rechargeable batteries, we go through a couple billion batteries a year in America, and batteries have lots of heavy metals. And if people just go through them and use them and use them and use them and then throw them out, all those metals are going back into the environment and will seep down into the water. So a lot of stuff like that that's just basic. How to improve your ecological footprint. Think about who you're voting for. Does your politician have a positive environmental track record? And we have on savethefrogs.com, we have a how to help page that's got at least 50 ways that people can get involved. And then, of course, there's stuff, can you help save the frogs, our organization? People can donate. It's tax deductible. We're a public charity. People can volunteer. People can go to our website, spread the word page, download some flyers, post them up around town. We have a Facebook page, facebook.com/savethefrogs. There's various ways people can use social media to spread the word, talk to their local teachers, set up a Save the Frogs Day event in their town.
Well, listen, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us about all of this. Thank you very much for all the work you're doing on something that I think, frankly, is a lot more important than most people realize. Thank you very much. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks, Charles, for having me on and helping spread the word.
And thank you for watching the United States of Common Sense.